Shri Rama Rama Ramiti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Ramanama Varanani. I delight in the beautiful name of Sri Rama. I delight again and again, for even once remembered, the name of Sri Rama bestows a fruit equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astoma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be illumined. May we not unnecessarily quarrel with each other. And peace, peace be unto all. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. That is Shere Khan in Irish. So we are continuing the story of Rama, that great ancient epic. And it is one of two great epics from the East, alongside with the West, the Homer and the Iliad, great epics from the West. And both are really discovered to be historical accounts. Ramayana and Mahabharata are classified as itihasas, that is, historical accounts, but we may find some fantastic things within them, and that is because this story has layers and levels of meaning. The layers and levels of meaning are inherently spiritual because that is the Oriental approach. What is the purpose in life? It is to arrive at and explore that depth that we call spirit that is within us and everywhere. So while it is a delightful story that is contained in poetry, in drama, song, dance, etc., but it is also a lesson in life, a life lesson. Rama is presented as a great hero, but is also presented as a human. Also, at the moment, in this particular section of the story, he is there as a student, learning how to be a skilled military person and how to conquer all the evils currently in the forest that Vishwamitra has taken him to. Vishwamitra gives him two mystic formulas known as Bala and Atibala. These were taught to the pupils, namely Rama and Lakshmana. It's a curious thing that weapons should be mantras. Mantra, if you take it as a protecting thought from the same root origin as manas, mind, it means that thought is more powerful than any physical weapon around. And of course, that was known, the art of that was known in those ancient days, that thought can be either destructive or constructive. It's an energy that arrives at our substation called the mind, and we can divert it in any way we wish. When we say constructive, it means constructive for everyone, including ourselves. So you'll recall from last week that Vishwamitra takes the two young boys, Rama and Lakshmana, and we have this episode, Kamashrama, an ashram that is named after Kama, desire. It's a significant institution that they came across because it was here that Shiva burnt to ashes the lustful Manmata. And the story, if anybody is familiar with, it was the place where Kama, embodied as a kind of Eros, was destroyed. So one night was spent by these three people at this place, Kamashama. And we pick up the story close by to that. Just to give you a brief description of what we mentioned last week, they would have rowed in a boat, and you can imagine spray flying in their faces. But you see, the whole forest was infested. Now again, I mentioned the spiritual dimension level of the story. What is the forest for us? When we encounter people and places and events, they can be orderly or confusing. Things can come to us, we don't know where from, but a psychologist will tell us, no, they come from the subconscious mind. Yogis are great psychologists. They would tell you the same thing. There's nothing that comes from outside. It all comes from inside. So we are doing the best we can, just humanly speaking, in the forest of life that can have mixed messages in terms of this direction, can be confusing, and there will be inherent dangers there. Wild animals will be there, no doubt. And in this case, monsters will be there. So going through the ocean of life, and there's a one analogy, but another analogy will be a forest. So Lakshmana, Rama, Vishwamitra find themselves in a forest with many historical adventures going on. And in this particular forest, there's a noise that rumbles forth, outweighing every other wild animal's roar. And what is that? And Vishwamitra, the great Rishi, says, see, the Saraya springs in the high mountains from the Manasa lake that Brahma made with a thought. All creation comes from a thought, whether it is the creation of our own world that we make or the cosmic creation that makes all this. The Ganga, which fell from the stars, you know about. This place of the echo is where the Saraya flows into the golden Ganga. Worship the rivers, they are goddesses, and will bless you all. This we covered last week. And so with folded hands, they do exactly as they were bid. They prayed and to the swirling currents. Because when we talk about life, it has become customary to view nature scenes as very nice, very pleasant, very relaxing, but also very inert, very insentient. And it takes the mind and the insight of a creative poet, an artist, to see it's not just that. Every single leaf is sentient. Every flow of water is sentient. Every molecule is sentient. In the body, everything there is sentient. We know it. But even a rock is sentient. Every atom is sentient. This is the old way of thinking that is infusing everything with what is fundamentally there, namely spirit. And we have become callous in the name of science and secularism and reductionism, thinking that these are just chance things and it is just matter. But science has shown that there's no such thing as just matter. It's not possible. The matter as presented to the scientist is a great mystery. Now they, having gained that shore and so on and walked away from the river, which was so wide, they couldn't see the rishis who stood across it and waving to them still. But now they entered a jungle that grew thick and forbidding, not 100 paces from the water. Vishwamitra walked unhesitatingly into the forest as if he saw an invisible trail leading into it. This evokes a great imagination of the adventure that is going on. And the princes, they follow him naturally in a mood of reverence. But the forest is dark, is dense and damp. This world could also be viewed like that if we have a pessimistic attitude. No light or wind entered it to dry the rain. and dew that lay upon the leaves and grass, or blow away an evil air that hung heavily, and all was still, and the silence was deep and uncanny under the canopy of branches. Now you see, in reading these stories and reflecting on these stories and meditating on these stories, see the amount of beautiful detail that this particular author that I'm reading from has. It doesn't take much for us to be in the scene itself. He says there were no paths, and it was plain that no man ventured in here. They heard snakes on the ground, bees in the air, and birds in the trees, all eerily loud. They heard their own breaths and heartbeats so clearly. And Rama says, surely this is a perfect forest for rishis to have their ashramas, their dwelling places, their retreats. But it is deserted, he noticed. Even the songs of birds seem to grate in their throats from anxiety. Are there no flowers or streams or pools here? Why is this jungle such an ominous place? Why does it have this feeling? And Vishwamitra then says, see, once there was no jungle here at all, but there were some kingdoms. They were fertile and populous. And when Indra slew the Brahmana Ashura Vritra, he was guilty of Brahmahatya. Now, I mentioned last week that this battle between Indra and Vritra is a continuous battle indicating, according to some people, a Vedic science. That is, there's a continuous battle between electrical energy pulling away on the one side and gravitational energy pulling away on the other side. That is how we have the world as it is, even at the atomic level. The electron keeping its distance from the proton, and the proton overall keeping its relationship between other protons, so that there's a separateness despite a unity, and there is also a will to move outward, preventing us from seeing what is truly there. So anyway, a story is told. We told it last week that Tataka gave birth to a boy. She named him Maricha, and it was destined that the death will bring you fame one day. Rama, he says this. And the prince looked startled at the prediction that Vishwamitra is giving. But Vishwamitra continues that Sunanda died soon after his son was born, and Tataka was unhinged with grief, her hair hanging loose, drunk on forest brew. She went to Agastya's ashram. With her infant on her hip, she made advances to the great Rishi. Agastya, bright as flames, cursed her. Shameless woman, be a Rakshasi as monstrous as your heart is full of darkness. There's a reason why we have psychological monsters. If we are able to trace it back, we'll see that there's a cause somewhere. We need not dwell on it, just to know that there is a cause for all these things. And if we want to advance at all, spiritually and psychologically, we have to acknowledge the presence of what we have there, and then arm ourselves. These two mantras that I mentioned were given by Vishwamitra to Lakshmana and Rama. And these were mystic formulas, equivalent to weapons. But the meaning of these is strength and greater strength. That's extremely important. What should we value most in life? What virtue should we cultivate? How should we deal with our own monsters, internal monsters? Strength and greater strength too. Swami Vivekananda made that beautiful statement. The only thing I teach is Upanishads, and from that I only teach this one thing, strength. What is ignorance? Weakness. So they are passing through this dense forest, and Tataka and her son Maricha are there. And of course we understand that they are hideous monsters, of extraordinary strength themselves, owing to the power to transform themselves into any being on the earth. Our own internal psychological, emotional monsters are like that. They can transform themselves into things which look extremely beautiful, things that look as if they are to our advantage. And they are strong. If our mind is weak, they become strong. So what we require is greater strength, greater resolve. It comes out as self-control and discipline. These are our weapons, and mantras are our weapons. Mantras are not just positive assertions. Mantras have a potency, because with every sound, with every name comes some corresponding concept and a meaning. And when we evoke that, we evoke the embodiment of what that means, if there's an emotional input toward it. And so this becomes extremely potent. The story is illustrating this so beautifully. Now you see, we left the story last week with a dilemma. What was the dilemma? Rama's dilemma was, Tataka is a woman, but she's a demoness. Should I really? Is it ethical to kill her? This was the dilemma that he had. And sometimes we also have a dilemma ourselves about what is the right course of action. Anyway, the right course of action was dictated, as it were, by their teacher, and we just have to remind ourselves of the background to it. Vishwamitra is now at his ashram. All three are now at their ashram. And the ashram is called Sita ashram. Sita ashram, that is the place of refuge for perfection. It's a holy abode. And what makes it holy is that this is the place where Vishwamitra is doing his sacrifices. But there's another dimension to this, because it is also the place of the Vamana, that is, the Lord Narayana, who incarnates from age to age in order to uplift people, and Rama now is seen to be the latest version of this. So I suppose we have to explore the story of Vamana. Let us then review what this brief story is. We'll do it very briefly. So Vamana, well, let's go a little further. Mahabali was the son of Virochana and the grandson of Prahlada, the good Ashura. He was so powerful, he was a powerful ruler, that even the great cosmic forces that we call devas were afraid. Mahabali had, by his deeds, acquired the power of the very highest god himself, Indra. Kashyapa and his spouse Aditi, of whom all the gods were of offsprings, Aditi is the mother of all these deities, they prayed to Vishnu, the one that pervades everywhere and sustains the entire universe, and begged him to be born as their son and protect Indra and the Devas from Mahabali. You see, the theme repeats itself time and time again. And in answer to their prayers, Vishnu was born of Aditi as this Vamana. Now, Vamana was presented in the form of a very young student. And he went to a yetna. It's all around yetnas. It's a great ceremony, a yaga that was being performed by this great Mahabali. And all, of course, were welcome. And to ask for and receive anything they wanted, that was the usual thing at these great things. Please, I'm the king, I can be generous to you, whatever you want. this generosity of spirit is auspicious for any sacrifice or any ritual that is designed to get something. And so when Vamana presents himself as a Sutta, Mahabali's guru, Sukra, the preceptor of all the demons, all the asuras, knew actually who he really was, and he cautions Mahabali against promising to grant the young Brahmana his request. And that indeed, this was the Lord Hari, the Lord of the universe, in disguise, come to undo him. But Mahabali didn't pay much heed to this, because he was puffed up with a kind of pride that comes with power. And it was his wont never to turn down a request, because he was also generous in spirit. Besides, he was at heart a great devotee of the Lord anyway. His lineage also indicates this. And so he felt that he would be blessed if the Lord should deign to accept a gift from him. So with a smile, unknowing smile really, Mahabali bade him ask for what he pleased, and without hesitation, he offers him, everything that I have, all I have is at your disposal, money, jewels, the wide earth, and all its inheritance, all its accoutrements and whatever is associated with it. But Vamana answered, no, he doesn't really want wealth. It's not of much use to him, because he's presenting himself actually as a Brahmana boy. And all he begged for was 3 pieces and paces of ground, that's all. And so sometimes Vamana is described not as a student, but as a dwarf. Anyway, the monarch smiled because he saw how small he was. Oh, you only want enough land, enough piece of ground that your small steps will cover. Are you sure? And so he smiled and he looked at the diminutive brahmachari's legs and said, so be it, pace and take whatever you want. And so the little brahmachari, the little student, suddenly grows in size into Trivikrama, and with one step measured the earth, and with the other the entire heavens, and there being no room left for the 3rd step that had been granted, he had to set foot on Mahabali's devoted head. And in the eyes of God, the head of a bhakta, a great devotee, is as wide as the earth or the heavens. Mahabali, whose head was blessed by this touch of the Lord Narayana's foot, became one of the 7 immortals of the world. So there's a great story, and the story illustrates many, many things. Just very briefly, the importance of humility and not underestimating the potency of the Lord who's secretly working everywhere, and not prejudging any individual, but actually every so-called individual inherently is the Lord of the universe. If we have eyes to see, we'll see this. And the Lord of the universe owns all the 3 worlds, the entire existence. Anyway, after relating all this story, Vishwamitra adds, this is where the place where we are, our particular ashram, is actually where Narayana and later Kashyapa performed their tapas, their spiritual discipline. And this resulted, of course, in this incarnation of God Vamana. And in this holy place, that's where I live. And here, the Rakshasas come, they obstruct our worship and our austerities. But your coming here is an end to this evil, he points out. So be it, said Rama. Wonderful. Anyway, we have to take stock that the arrival of Vishwamitra and the 2 princes was really a signal for rejoicing at Vishwamitra's ashram. Many rishis were there, and they offered water and fruits according to custom. And Rama told Vishwamitra that he might begin the preparations for his yetna immediately. And Vishwamitra, Sorry, I've lost my thread here. And yes, and so Vishwamitra begins the preparation for this 6-day yetna. That means he has to keep silent for 6 days, and Rama and Lakshmana have to keep watch over everything. So Vishwamitra takes his first vows, and getting up very early in the morning, all the princes went to Vishwamitra and asked one question. You see, you want us to look out for these demons, these Rakshasas. Same thing with us, we have to be alert. But we might ask, when will temptation, fear, and doubt arise in our own minds, in the forest of our own minds? Well, the answer is we don't know. Our tendency is such that any clue is capable of bringing this out in us. So this question was asked, but you see, Vishwamitra can't answer. Everybody knows 6 days is available there, but he has a vow of silence. He can't answer them. When are these Rakshasas expected to arrive? Then we can arrange our sleep and our lookouts and what have you accordingly, and we can be prepared. Well, of course, Vishwamitra has previously prepared them. He's given them weapons, he's given them mantras, he's taught them certain skills beyond ordinary capacities. And now they have to keep alert. Same thing with all of us. We have to keep watchful. Watch and pray. And so he couldn't answer, but the rishis, his juniors, they gave some clues. They told the princes that they should be ceaselessly vigilant, and they should be ceaselessly vigilant for the duration of the yajna, namely 6 nights and days, to safeguard the sacrifice. So the princes, naturally fully armed, they kept vigil, and they kept vigil for 6 days and nights. But on the morning of the 6th day, naturally Rama says to Lakshmana, brother, I think now is the time, since 6 days is up, for the enemies to come. Let us be particularly watchful. And even as he was saying this, flames shot up from the sacrificial fire. For Agni, that representation of the Lord of the universe that leads the devotees onward and upward, the god of fire, if you want to put it like this, the Rig Veda starts off with so many mantras to Agni. He knew that the Rakshasas had arrived. And as the rites were being performed, then they heard from the sky a great, great roar. Naturally, Rama looks up and he sees Maricha, Subahu, and all their followers preparing to shower unclean things on the sacrificial fire, as they have always been doing. The sacrificial fire of your mind is under threat from unclean things assailing it at any given time. And the army of Rakshasas covered the sky like a great black cloud. You can just imagine it. So Rama says to Lakshmana, look, Lakshmana, and he lets go what is called Manavashtra at Maricha. And as was intended, it didn't destroy him, didn't kill him, but wrapped him up in a resistless force and hurled him in, what is described as 100 yojanas, great distance near the sea. And with the Agni Shastra, another weapon, Rama kills Subahu. And then the 2 princes utterly destroyed their whole retinue. The entire army of the Rakshasas are gone. So this is exactly what we should be doing. We should be invoking our inherent strength. These are our weapons. And dealing with these enemies of ours under lust and greed and anger, doubt and fear, all of these negative things, and positively resolve to defeat them Not only them, but all the associated ideas that are with them. Anyway, with this Agni Shastra, Rama killed Subahua. They destroyed the entire army and so on. And of course, the sky is bright again. You can say the mind is pure and bright again when these things are destroyed. Vishwamitra was supremely happy. Then at the completion of his 6-day yetna, and he was very grateful to King Dasaratha ultimately for lending him these 2 royal sons of his and asserting that he has fulfilled his promise and admiring the great fortitude of these youngsters. Then he declares this ashram has, through you, that is Rama and Lakshmana, and also their father Dasharatha, not there present, of course, to become again a scene of successful performance of activities, dedicated activities as service to the world at Siddhashrama, Vishwamitra's ashram. Sita really means success. So we gain success in this world by attending to the spiritual dimension that we have, purifying the mind. Anyway, the next day, Rama and Lakshmana, after their morning prayers, they go to Vishwamitra and they're awaiting further instructions. We have to bear in mind that the purpose of Rama's birth, going back to this parallel event in so-called heaven, that Rama's birth was not unknown. It was already known to Rishi Vishwamitra. He has this insight. He's playing out a drama. He knows how it's going to work and he knows how it's going to end. And so he knew the powers and weapons that he had given specifically to Rama. But still, the actual fact when experienced is something more than mere expectation. So sage Vishwamitra was happy beyond words. His face glowed like a flame, and he then thought of the service he still had to do for Rama. What is this service? Don't forget, Vishwamitra arrives at King Dasaratha's court when King Dasaratha and his advisors are thinking about marrying. They're thinking, how will we find a suitable bride for Rama, Lakshmana, and so on. And so Vishwamitra now steps in to fulfill the whole picture. And so the rishis assembled there said to Rama, we intend proceeding to the kingdom of Videha. Kingdom of Videha, this was the country where the capital city of was Mithila, and we know that the very famous King Janaka was there. He was an illustrious philosopher king. We read about him in the Upanishads, and he intends to perform a great, great sacrifice there. Now, this is all following story from the destruction of Tataka, but I have to mention one thing. You can see how Rama hesitates to kill Tataka. Sometimes we hesitate to do the right thing. We have to think carefully and follow some higher wisdom. Vishwamitra gives that higher wisdom by saying, no, even though she's a female, you have to strike her. And the final blow was an arrow into the heart of Tataka. In the same way, we have to, in an unwavering way, fire our arrow, our directional arrow toward the heart of things, and destroy all these negative, deleterious elements of weakness as far as we possibly can. So everyone is now going into this a new adventure coming. A new adventure means let us now go to the court of King Janaka. Let us engage in his great yetna there. You see how many times people are performing yajnas, a kind of the only ceremony available at that time, the fire ceremony, tremendously potent. Everyone is going there, and so the brothers also go there. And it is proper that the Prince of Ayodhya should see the marvelous item which is awaiting them. Now, what is this item? It is a great bow. It is Shiva's bow. It is sitting there in the court of King Janaka. Just to see it was just the mention of it. So it was decided that they all go there. Now we come now to the next section of this story. And that is the section on Sita. For the first time, we introduce the other dimension of the story. One side is Rama, the other side is Sita, like two sides of the same coin. Just to remind you that Sita was born from the earth. She was found in a furrow and brought up by King Janaka. For that reason, she is called Janaki. So, just to remind you, King Janaka was the king of Mithila. Now, he was a good king. He was a philosopher king. He knew the truth. And so that made him an ideal ruler. It's a lesson to everybody. In these modern times, if you want to exercise power, then inner wisdom has to be the basis for it. If not, then power will be exercised against the weak. Power will be destructive. And we've seen over the last century and even this century how destructive the use of power, particularly nuclear weapons, how threatening this can be to the whole existence of the world. So he was an ideal ruler, and as a result, he was much revered, and he was a friend of King Dasaratha as well. And when King Dasaratha had planned his yetna, or when you remember King Dasaratha had this great yajna, that's how the story begins, for progeny. Then King Janaka sent not just messengers, but ministers, people of high status, to Mithila to invite King Janaka along. They did that personally, a very special guest. Anyway, Janaka was not only a brave king, a warrior, a philosopher, a man of wisdom, but he was also well versed, of course, in the Shastras that made him like this, and the Vedas. And as any rishi and beloved pupil of Yajnavalkya was known to be, he was much revered. He had the exposition of Yajnavalkya, and all of this we find mentioned in the Prataranyaka Upanishad and other places. Now in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna also cites Janaka as an illustrious example of the Karma Yogin. If you think you're busy, then become a king. There can be nobody busier than a king. So you have this flavor of sage, of rishi, that is an administrative stage. Don't forget, Vishwamitra was a warrior originally. And then he became a Brahmana, that is a no Brahman. And therefore, he himself could not in any military way defeat these Rakshasas. He had to bring military people along to do it. But King Janaka was an administrative saint, and we need both of them. If you go to the Artha Shastra, there's a description of how busy a king is in those days. Getting up early in the morning, his whole schedule taken care of. After all, he alone was responsible for the whole kingdom. In that sense, it was a kind of autocratic or autocracy, but not quite, because wisdom prevailed and his advisors were always sought. Their advice was always taken on board. We see that in King Janaka, King Dasaratha, where his advisor, his guru, is Vashishta. And so, anyway, according to Sri Krishna and the Bhagavad Gita, Janaka is cited as the best example we possibly have of a karma yogi. Somebody whose example we should follow, because most people in these modern times will be karma yogis, dedicated to selfless action or detached action, action that will not create disturbing waves in your mind. And Janaka was also worthy of being the father of Sita, and Sita was to be effectively the wife of Vishnu in the form of Rama, come down to earth in human form. And this chapter deals with that whole beautiful episode. Anyway, desirous of performing a special yajna, Janaka at one time plowed the chosen site, and as usual, this was done by his own hand. This is the story of how he discovered Sita. And as the field was being cleared and leveled, Janaka saw among the shrubs as baby, divinely beautiful. Janaka himself was childless, and he accepted the infant, infant as a particular divine sign, as a goddess Earth's gift to him. And so, taking the child in his arms, he went to his beloved wife and said, "Here is a treasure for us, and I found this child on the site of a yajna, and we shall make it our own." And she joyfully consents. The beauty of the goddess of earth has to be unsurpassed, and certainly it was the case. Mortal eyes cannot see in its fullness, but we get glimpses of it as we gaze with grateful hearts on the emerald green of Ireland, for example, or golden ripeness of springtide or autumn fields. There's nothing more beautiful to the human eye than Mother Earth, and we call her Mother Earth also. And so, this our Mother, we stand in awe and adoration of her glories, mountains, valleys. Mother Earth doesn't complain when we dig up her skin and look for diamonds. So, this loveliness was natural to Sita, and she had it in its entirety. Kamban would have it that Sita's beauty threw into the shade Lakshmi herself, who came up with nectar as the ocean of milk was being churned. This child of divine beauty was brought up by King Janaka and his dear queen. This is the background to Sita's birth and her upbringing. Now, when she reaches the age of marriage, there's a custom, a very wonderful, wonderful custom, Swayamvara it's called, and Janaka was sad that he would have to part with her because she's going to be somebody's bride. Anyway, though he had tried hard, he was unable to choose a prince worthy of her. And many kings came to Mithila seeking her hand in marriage. But in Janaka's view, none of them was ever good enough. And this is not just typical father saying, "My daughter's not good enough for you." He saw this specialness, divine specialness in his daughter Sita. And so he thought over the matter, and long ago, pleased with yajna performed by Janaka, Varma presented to him Lord Shiva's bow and 2 quivers. And this is now presenting a challenge. Anybody who wants to come and look upon Sita and say, "This is my bride," will have to show their valor, have to show their unusual and extraordinary virtues. And the test would be this bow. So that was an ancient heavy bow which no ordinary person could even move. And this was kept by him as an honored heirloom. And since only a very exceptional person could be considered worthy of Sita, Janaka issues this proclamation: "Sita, my daughter, will be given in marriage to that prince, that person of royal lineage, who can lift this bow, who can bend this bow, who can string this bow." This is the bow of Shiva, which Varuna gave to me and to none other, so it's special. Now, of course, many princes came, and they had heard of Sita's great, exquisite beauty, and they went to Mithila, only to return disappointed and humiliated, because none could fulfill this condition of simply picking the bow up, bending it, stringing it. It was too tough a task for them. Anyway, led by Vishwamitra, the rishis from Siddhashram, they proceeded to Mithila, and they came with bullock carts transporting their luggage. Imagine royal luggage, and luggage belonged to the rishis, and the animals and the birds in the ashram set out to follow Vishwamitra, everybody in a kind of pilgrimage. They wanted to go because they saw the extraordinary adventure that was about to unfold, but Vishwamitra bids them please stay in the ashram. It's an echo of some of the ashrams I've come across. Anyway, it was evening when they reached the river Sona, and there they rested for the night. And Vishwamitra, he's recounting to Rama and Lakshmana the history of the place, extraordinary history. So getting up in the early morning, they continued their journey and crossed another river, which wasn't that deep, but by noon they were there at the Ganga River. And they bathed naturally in this holy river, and the rishis made lustrations to their forebearers, libations to their forebearers. They improvised an ashram there, as they had to do, and performed all their rituals, their ceremonies, and they cooked their food there at that place. And when the meal was over, they sat around Vishwamitra, and at his request, and or at least the request of the two princes, told the story of the Ganga. Now, we'll pick the story up next week. I'm going to finish off a little early this morning, due to the fact that the many preparatory events are going on today. It's our 4th anniversary. And so I leave you with the thought of the scene on the way to the court of King Janaka. You can anticipate what's going to happen, of course, that Rama, being Vishnu incarnate, not only picks the bow up, but bends it, strings it, and also breaks it. Anyway, we'll continue this story next week. Story of Rama, a great inspirational story, a great historical story that is valuable and valid for everybody and teaches us these great lessons. If you have a copy of Ramayana, and review all the things that we're discussing here, it'd be well worthwhile, because there are so many details and sub-details in this. And we're about to go off on a story that is related to the history of the Ganga, as related by Vishwamitra. And next time we have a pilgrimage, let's say, to the river Ganga, we should bear in mind these stories and also their spiritual purport for us. To bathe in the Ganga, of course, is a great thing. Many people hesitate today because in the lower reaches of it, they're afraid of pollution, and indeed that may well be so. But those people who have faith in the river can bathe in there despite the quality of the water and be blessed and drink the water as well. But higher up, in places such as Kankal, Hardwa, Rishikesh, and even further up to the very mouth, Gangotri, and beyond and further up, we see a pristine purity. And the more we go into that, the more we're going into the Himalayas and seeing now, catching the ancient culture of India, which is intrinsically self-exploratory spirituality, we may call it. So we hope to maybe go on another pilgrimage, maybe in January 2023. We're busy thinking about it a little bit, looking at the logistics and seeing if that's possible and feasible. And so those who are interested can email me, and we'll see if we can firm up the details for you if it's going ahead. I'm putting into the category of possibility. We'll finish off then with Om Shanti Shanti Shanti, peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Thank you, Swamiji. Pranams.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne journée.
Merci.
Oh.